So hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to be part of such a big and important event. I know that some of you are already seen our other sessions, which we have prepared over this week. And I'm really happy and honored to be a host today. My name is Irena Pichola. I'm a sustainability leader partner in our Central European practice. I'm also leading our global efforts around climate for the public sector. And if we can switch slides to actually get into the content and also the great introductions of our great guests today. So if we can move on. I'm actually today in a great group. Hans-Jürgen Walter, who is our global lead for sustainable finance, will be our speaker today. We also have Michael Pieper, who is very much involved in leading sustainable finance agenda in German firm, bringing a lot of practical examples to the discussions today. Ákos Lukács, my great colleague in Central Europe, leading sustainability practice in Hungary, but also being very much involved in sustainable finance projects. And one of the projects will be actually presented today with our great guest, Jacek Kubaś, a great friend and a client from EBRD. Welcome, everyone. So I believe that we have a big challenge today because we actually got a task of putting the ESG and sustainable finance into 1 hour session. And actually, it should be a 1 week event to actually introduce all the elements. So I believe that what we will try to do, we will really try to pass some of the main inspirations and main facts and regulations which are actually shaping that agenda now, but also bring a practical expertise and practical examples of projects and initiatives to inspire you, to take you on board with the potentially exciting journey which sustainability and ESG is actually bringing to the financial sector. So some house rules before we start. What is important that we still have our question chat box. So if there's any questions which you want to ask us, please do. There will be the questions, 2 questions which we want to ask over the session. So please take your voice. It's very interesting for us to get your perspective. It is very interactive nowadays. So we try to put these interactions at least a little bit. Please be muted. You're muted, so we cannot hear you, we cannot see you. So for us, it's a little bit difficult, but we'll try to manage that. So in terms of the substance, I have to say that being myself involved in sustainability topics for 20 years, if we can move on with slides, please. It is so important to understand that the financial sector has actually experienced a major shift in the role is playing in the sustainable finance and in the financing and in sustainability as such. What is really important is that this sector is actually in the central place for supporting the transformation which is needed. What we do every year, we do the analysis. We call it like banking and capital markets outlook, and more ESG and sustainability topics actually were presented in the previous outlooks. And this year outlook is actually very clearly summarizing a huge and important leadership role which banking sector has to play in order to move the transformation forward. There are definitely rising expectations towards financial institutions, both in terms of supporting economic activities which are towards the net positive, but also about creating the certain behaviors and standards within their clients and in the interaction with clients. And the regulators, as you know and you see, are actually playing a huge role in making sure that all of this is happening. But what is important, many of you are actually having the challenges in making this right. There is lack of a good information system, lack of a good data management, lack of a proper risk management procedures in all of that. So even though the journey is exciting, I know it actually brings a lot of challenges, and it also needs a good and proper management on behalf of banks. So what we see, the big investments which are coming, the big strong commitments by the financial institutions like the ones mentioned here by Citibank or by Goldman Sachs, they are definitely just presenting the huge new shifts in the perspectives of banks. EBRD, which is obviously one of our, I would say, first runners in that agenda, will be definitely able to share some more facts here. If we can move on to another slide, we actually put together a picture where sustainable investments and the role of banking sector is actually in the heart of the whole economy in a way, where there's a lot of different players into the system, and the real economy is something which has a strong influence and has a strong role to change in the spectrum where financial sector is actually supporting that change. So a lot of that is ahead of us. I'm really happy for seeing that not only big international players are moving, but also our local Central European banking sector, which is so active today with us, is also taking this very seriously. So we'll be very happy to guide you a little bit through, first of all, the regulatory landscape, then from the practical perspective, and also to the examples which we can share with you. So Hans-Jürgen, I would like to pass it to you, as your global role allows you also to see this landscape from a not only European but actually global perspective. And I would like you to share with you this perspective and also some insights which might be interesting for our banking sector here.
Yes, thank you very much, Irina. So maybe let me pick up your last point, yes, because you mentioned that the financial sector is acting as an intermediary between investors and the real economy, and this is exactly the expectation from politics and.
You got muted, Hans-Jürgen?
Which probably, yes.
Yeah, we hear you well now.
Okay, couldn't you hear me?
Yeah, we hear.
Okay, anyway, okay, thank you. So because as you know, there are really ambitious sustainability targets, in particular climate targets, which needs to be financed. And for that reason, there is a huge expectation on the financial sector in order to finance the entire journey and to make it happen that the real economy and the corporates are really working on their sustainability measures in order to achieve the ambition targets. So there is a lot going on. Just to give you some figures, which probably most of you know, that there is expected a yearly investment budget in Europe only in order to achieve climate neutrality until 2050 of around 250, 300 billion every year, which needs to be financed by the financial sector. So there is a huge voice of the regulator, which is pressing more or less on the financial sector. The other forces which are, of course, typical for each business are the customer behavior and the demand, which is developing. So I will come to this in a second. If we look at the demand side and products of the markets, or which are offered in the market, there is a huge growth on sustainability related products in order to get money and to finance the measures which I mentioned. And of course, each of the market players and banks, asset managers, etc., and their competitors needs to take the decision whether they want to run sustainability activities in order to be compliant or in order to become a market leader in a certain area. So it's interesting and tough decision, of course, whether you want to be or consider this as a differentiator for your business model and for in the market, or whether you want just be a follower and do what is needed and required by the regulator. So these are all pressures which are currently on the financial sector. And so we did a kind of survey across the most significant global important banks and asset managers, and just to give you a feeling around what's going on in the financial market. So 70% or even more than 70% of the GSIBs already stated or articulated clear statements on their sustainability targets and measures. even 40% of the statements are connected to quantitative KPIs. So you really can measure whether they are able to achieve their goals. And if you just look at the governance structure, so more than 3/4 established a dedicated CSO function already in their organization. So it's not a topic which is everywhere in the organization, or in certain areas there have been just reporting function more or less in order to report and communicate the sustainability measures. Now there is a dedicated CSO function covering all the various topics across all functions of a bank. Might be risk, finance, operations, etc. So this is a clear indicator, of course, that the topic is getting more and more important and is in most of the cases directly linked to the CEO office. If we switch to the next slide, please. I would focus a little bit in this group on the regulatory and driven and standard setters driven requirements in the markets, which is linked to this development. So there are 5 major topics which I would like to mention, and I start with the first one, which is classification, because the topic is evolving, as you know. And we start with climate. Maybe there will be other environmental topics. Maybe in the future there will be more social topics. As long as the market doesn't know, or the market participant doesn't know what we are exactly talking about, it's quite difficult to collect the right data, to make some assessments and to define products which are belonging to a certain standard. For that reason, we need a classification, and Europe is leading in a certain way with the EU taxonomy now on that, in order to define a benchmark, which is the basis for more or less everything which we do in this area. So the second area is products, what I mentioned already. So there need to be some principles, some rules, bond or sustainability linked loan, etc. So there are some regulations going on which the market needs to apply and comply. Benchmarks, of course, quite interesting, because you need a kind of index in order to compare performances and to compare products, for examples. And this is an area where currently, index providers are working very hardly on getting benchmarks in place, which are hopefully will be applied on a global level in order to compare it on a global level as well. Risk is a super important topic, of course, because as you know, the financial sector is pretty much risk or managed by the risk exposures. So for that reason, there are a lot of regulations going on and requirements how we integrate climate and environmental risk into existing risk frameworks. So Michael, who will talk after me, will give us an example on how risk integration works on a concrete project. But this is a topic which tied up a lot of effort in the last months for getting this work in banks and asset managers. And last but not least, the entire disclosure and reporting requirements, because when you do something in this area, of course, the market needs to know about this. So for that reason, you need to disclose certain things which are linked to the taxonomy, again, to close the circle here. And you need to do some reporting in order to inform investors and others about your activities and your performance. So a lot is going on in this area, but just as a last comment, so maybe it started with a more regulatory journey at the beginning, but now the needle is moving towards a much more strategic perspective on that. So what I mentioned at the beginning, so what will be my future role or my preferred business model in this area? And these are really strategic discussions which are currently taking place in banks and asset managers, and of course insurance companies as well. But I think today we focus on banks and asset managers in particular. So if you look at the next slide, and that's a very heavy slide with a lot of, let me say, impact, which is related to the 5 topics which I mentioned before on the left-hand side, so classification, products, etc. So I don't want to run through all of this, but as I said, currently there is a huge impact on all FSI market participants on implementing the EU taxonomy and all the related topics which are directly linked to having a common understanding of what sustainability means. Products, I mentioned it already, and I will come on the next slide a little bit more on detail on how this market is developing. But of course, there are a lot going on in responding to the market demand and to differentiate byproducts from competitors. Benchmarks I mentioned already. Risk, I would skip this one because Michael, as I said already, will give us a concrete example on that. I just wanted to mention that beside the risk integration, so climate risk integration into the existing management frameworks, there is a huge demand on stress testing, climate scenario generating or definition analysis, and stress testing the entire thing. So which is related, of course, to the risk integration as well. So these are the 2 topics which I wanted to mention here in terms of demand, which we currently see in the market. And last but not least, which is probably the most known topic, is reporting and disclosures, which developed significantly as well. So there are major new requirements which needs to be fulfilled by market participants in order to support decision-making processes, etc. Okay, just a quick view on the demand side on the next slide when it comes to products. As you can see, it's a typical hockey stick, yes, so typical probably for all emerging markets in terms of starting small and getting bigger. But yes, last year we saw an all-time cumulative issuance of sustainable debts of more than $1 trillion. So this is, I guess, 1 or 2% of the entire extremely fast-growing market. So it started with green bonds, which probably most of you know, but it continues and it's getting more diverse. So there are now sustainability bonds growing much faster. So which is not only bonds which are not only looking at, or let me say, climate. It's more, for example, on social aspects as well. The biggest growth area here, dark blue, is sustainable linked loans. So loans which are linked to the borrower's performance on defined ESG criteria. For example, if you fulfill a certain requirement or benchmark, you will get a better interest rate for your loan, things like that. Yes, so this is extremely fast growing. So and we expect, of course, that this will continue in the upcoming years. To share a global perspective on that, on the right-hand side, I would just point out that currently, or at least in 2019, but this is hasn't changed that much, Europe is covering 50% or contributing 50% of the issuance of sustainable linked debt. So Europe is definitely leading, but we see currently let me say, huge activities, in particular after the change of the administration in the US, that the US market is developing very fast now as well. So we expect that there will be certain wave of catching up Europe in the US as well. And Asia, of course, is active in this area as well. But the good news in this group, because I guess this is a European panel here, so we are leading in most of the topics from a European perspective, and leading from a product perspective as well. Okay, just looking a little bit at the time, I would just mention and summarize at the last slide that what I said already, that if I would need to point out the topics which we currently see on a global basis, and this is the same in Europe because Europe is globally leading, as I said. So it's about ESG strategy, classification, products, risk integration, reporting, disclosure, and last but not least, because I didn't mention that much during the last minutes, is ESG data management and analytics, what Irena already mentioned. So everything that we want to do needs data, of course, in this area, and we are currently lacking the availability of data and the quality of data which is needed. So this is one of the most important underlying requirements which we are currently working on together with our clients, so banks, asset managers, and financial institutions, to find ways to get and to generate the right data which is needed in order to run all the things which I mentioned the last 10 minutes. So these are the areas where currently our clients are and banks and financial institutions are working at. And yes, so this is the overview which I wanted to share with you. And we are, of course, interested whether you share this perspective. Yes, and for that reason, Irena, I think we prepared a poll on that. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much, Hans-Jürgen. I believe that this is exactly the moment where we want a little bit of interaction. So as Hans-Jürgen mentioned, there are the specific areas where we see the big challenges and the big struggles of our clients, and we would be very interested to see which of that is actually the ones which you need to work on. So what is the kind of list of priorities for you, and you can mark one which is the most important for you, and it will be great to see how the different perspective from our attendees today is actually spread across. And as Hans-Jürgen mentioned, actually in a very short, like 10-minute intro to such a complicated regulatory landscape, I can only mention that we do have much more of a content information and different kind of analysis on that. So if any of you would be interested in following up and making sure that you know the detailed kind of requirements or anything, we can definitely be in touch. But on the other hand, there's also a great kind of collaboration which is happening around certain challenges, and we see more and more of a kind of banking associations and activities which is kind of mobilizing the preparation of a kind of common answers for some of the topics, and I definitely encourage you to look around and inspire each other, as well as reach out to get some of the answers to the questions which you are having. And I'm not sure if we are ready with the answers at this stage, and which we can see which of these areas are actually the most burning ones. We should have the, okay. So Hans-Jürgen, is it surprising for you what you see? How would you comment that?
Actually, not really surprising, because as I mentioned, data management is the big challenge currently, and that we are moving more and more towards strategic topics. A little bit surprising actually is the taxonomy topic with 5%, because as I said, this is the underlying requirement that needs to be defined and established. So this is a little bit surprising for me, but I fully understand and agree of course I agree to the result, but I fully understand that ESG strategy and ESG data management are leading here the responses.
Yeah, on the taxonomy, it might be the case that maybe not everyone is involved in that yet. So this is also the encouragement which we can make to actually get to know it, because the requirements are coming, and it's really important to get ready. And I'm actually quite positively, I would say, inspired by the ESG strategy, because it's really great that all of that is being treated strategically nowadays. And there's also a big risk integration part, and this is actually the great moment to introduce Michael now. And Michael will share with us his perspective into how the banking sector can actually try to make that risk integration, especially taking into account ESG risks, is actually happening. And I'm really excited about hearing your presentation and your inspirations from the work which you are doing. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Irena. Thanks for the nice introduction, and Hans-Jürgen, thanks for this great presentation. So just very quickly, where are we coming from? I mean, obviously you heard a lot now how sustainability has risen over the last years to more prominence, and obviously this is also reflected in the risk perspective. So many of you or some of you might already know the World Economic Forum report on global risk, and it's not really surprising that over the last years sustainability risk or climate-related risks have risen in importance, both in terms of likelihood of occurrence, but also in terms of impact. And what you see now is that in 2020, actually the risk landscape, at least as the World Economic Forum looks at it, is dominated by environmental risk. And this is a completely different picture compared to, let's say, 10 or 15 years ago, where we had mostly or purely economic driven or geopolitical risks that were, or even society risks that were dominating the risk landscape. And indeed, I think it's not only that these environmental risks are getting more important now, but obviously it's also influencing customer behaviors, and for that I think that is driving a lot of the change that we see in the market at the moment. Now, if you go to the next slide, I mean, obviously, we were talking about risk integration. Now, the question, obviously, for financial institutions is how do you manage those risks? And I think our view on that is, and this is more or less, this is in line with what the ECB actually, the ECB view on how to manage those ESG risks, and especially around environmental and climate risk, is you take those risks, and I think the key message is you don't manage them on a standalone basis, but you rather integrate them within your existing risk management practices. So let's walk through an example to just make this more tangible. Let's take aircraft financing. So your customer comes to the bank and wants to finance a new aircraft. So obviously there is a sustainability topic linked to that, and that's climate change / CO2 emissions. Now the question is, what's the risk attached to that topic? And one of the possible risks could be there might be a transition risk because the regulatory framework changes, and you know, you have to pay a CO2 tax, or there will be CO2 certificate trading, and this might impact then your existing risk types from different perspectives. So, for example, as you introduce a CO2 tax that's taxing aircrafts which are not so green, your earning or the client's earning situation deteriorates, and therefore its ability to you know, to fulfill the financing deteriorate. So there might be a credit risk. On the other side, there might be examples where, for example, your reputational risk side is impacted, or your market risk side, or your liquidity risk side. So all of these risks actually impact through different channels your existing risk landscape, and as such you would manage them from a risk perspective in the existing structures. So you know, if you walk through a risk and control process, you need to think through how to identify those risks, how to assess them, how to mitigate them, how to measure them, and then eventually how to report them. And obviously we have touched upon some of the key questions and challenges already that are related to that, and we come to that in just a minute. If you can go to the next slide, please. So, I mean, we also heard a lot already about, you know, the about the maturity of the approaches of financial institutions for ESG risk. So some consider it as or many obviously consider it as a strategic challenge that differentiates their business model and allows them to gain a market share, where others might only see this as a regulatory compliance exercise. But I think what's sure is that with the ECB guideline on environmental and climate risk, there is a lot, many areas of the bank are actually impacted through that. So we have highlighted here 7 thematic areas that many of you know. It will impact loan origination, so credit processes. It will impact the ICAP and eventually also the SREP processes. Obviously, you need to think through how you can integrate it in the risk appetite frameworks and how this aligns with the risk profile that you want to achieve from a top of the house perspective. There are questions around, you know, like really like tactical operational risk management, market and liquidity risk management. You need to think through how to integrate this into reporting and how to govern it. And I think the last ones are 2 very important examples. The first, so the governance example, obviously, because it builds the foundation to properly, to effectively and ideally also efficiently manage those risks. And the other one is around disclosures, and obviously that's driving a lot of the sustainability transformations throughout the industry at the moment. So I want to talk in more detail about those 2. If you can just jump to the next slide, and maybe just quickly on the ECB guideline, because we have now done many projects here in Europe around that. As you all know, the in-depth supervisory processes will start next year. There will be a big stress testing, and I think there are a lot of the challenges around that already identified, including the data question. But for the ECB guideline, at least, I think one of the key messages or the key learnings is it impacts most of your institutions, and mitigating those changes or implementing the measures that are related to that guideline will probably take over the next years. So I've seen remediation plans that cover anything between 3 to 5 years, even though the in-depth supervisory processes will start already in 2022. Now, around governance, and I don't think I need to lead you through this in detail. You all know, that you need to have clear roles of responsibilities, you need to have policies and all of that, but maybe just 2 highlights. One is on clear roles of responsibilities. Obviously, you need to have your 3 lines of defense concept in place. And I think that goes without saying for all risk types, but especially also for climate and environmental risk or ESG risk more broadly. It's not only a control function exercise. So it's not only the risk function that needs to cover all of these aspects. The first line, the businesses really need to understand what are the climate risks that I have on my book, and in order to be able to steer that sustainability transformation that we are all looking for. Secondly, and Hans-Jürgen mentioned this already in the beginning, there's a clear trend towards establishing a central function. Some of them call it a chief sustainability officer. Maybe we can just go to the next slide. So I will talk a little bit about that. As Hans-Jürgen already mentioned in the beginning, the fact that sustainability has gained such an importance, I think, is underpinned by 3 important drivers. One is the market environment is really dynamic, and it requires for financial institutions to have a holistic view around all the sustainability question, and that holistic view needs to be coordinated across the institution. Secondly, there are rising expectations from both internal and external stakeholders on ESG management. So I think Hans-Jürgen mentioned customers, mentioned supervisors, but obviously also the equity owners of the institutions. And then there's a clear trend towards considering ESG risk as a strategic differentiator that will allow you to gain market share over the coming years. So the question is, how do I manage this effectively in a financial institution? And I think for that, you really need to have a kind of horizontal role that helps you to drive that strategic transformation in the institution, that designs all the processes and the related governance around it, and I think probably most importantly, allows you to align the different stakeholders throughout the organization. Yeah? This is really impacting the whole bank or insurance or investment company. And for that, you need to have a very distinctive skill set. You need to be, obviously, you need to be strategic and analytical and conceptual in order to grasp this new world. But you also need to network in your company, and you need to have distinct leadership and communication skills in order to get the message across, and in order to get the whole institution across divisions on board. In terms of organization, so reporting channels, I think in many cases we see there's a direct line to the CEO, and I think that reflects just the fact that this is such an important topic, and that probably for many financial institutions, the CEO would say, I'm the most senior sustainability manager of my company. And obviously it helps such a central role also to drive the change that is necessary in that institution. I think there's a caveat, obviously, to many trends. There are also exceptions. We also see that there are reporting lines to the strategy office, or so to the chief strategy officer, or even to the chief financial or chief risk officer. Yeah, but I think the main trend is towards the CEO. If you can just quickly go to the next page, and I'm aware that we are running out of time. Obviously, ESG disclosures is an important topic that drives much of the transformation. I don't want to go into detail. Obviously, you, from a TCFD perspective, you need to disclose, you know, how the board is overseeing those risks, how you're managing those, on strategy. You need to really have a view on how this is impacting across your portfolios on a short to long-term perspective. Also, you need to have a view on 2-degree scenarios and how to get there. And for all of this, you need data. And obviously, you need to have data for risk management and for disclosure of metrics as well. And I think that's one of the key challenges that Hans-Jürgen mentioned already before. There's an imperative, I think, for all financial institutions, so globally actually, to build at least a climate and environmental data house that includes scope 1 to scope 3 GHG data, but also others. And at least many of the financial institutions, the large financial institutions in Europe that I know, are working on this right now with a stress test coming up next year. I think much of that needs to be in place. I know that many of you are struggling at the moment, at least to get the scope 3 data of your clients. But I think we're moving towards that. And I think from my perspective, and I've seen your poll, this is probably the biggest enabler. This is the one thing that you need to get right as fast as possible. I pause here. Irina, I give back the stage to you. And,
yeah, thank you so much. I believe that the great experience which you have actually working with clients, implementing some of that, is actually what drives this kind of recommendations which you can share. So thanks a lot for that. And now I would like to actually pass the voice to the very practical example, but more on a kind of macro level, as we are talking a lot about what's like a bank needs to do, but also there is a wider kind of capital market and stock exchanges movement, which needs to happen, which needs to create a base for a proper kind of interventions for sustainable growth. And I would like to pass to Akos and Jacek, who can share a great initiative which EBRD has taken into supporting this kind of sustainable finance agenda across the country, and also how these experiences may actually give some more inspirations to our guests for the meeting today, how they can fit into that agenda and how they can potentially see something for themselves there. So Akos, the voice is yours. I pass it to you.
Thank you very much, Irina, and thank you, everyone. Yes, I will have a small discussion with Jacek on these slides, which is the reason behind is that in Hungary and also in many other countries just recently, sustainable finance becomes such an important topic that people raise it to national strategy level. So this part of the presentation is for you as FSI institutions on which countries are making markets for you, where you can find your spots on who to finance and how to finance. And some countries such as Hungary is a front runner on that. So maybe I would just drop 3 messages that I see are shaping the national policies. One is the stock exchanges that are really helping with ESG reporting guides to get data, to get information out of the market for bankers, investors to see what's going on at all on the corporate level. Another institution, the central banks are shaping their asset purchasing programs, and they are coming out with guidances in the region to help monetization tools as well as financial fiscal incentives to drive the green growth. And the third one, of course, is the EU Green Deal and all its detailed regulation that is coming to our regions, which is triggering that nations have to come up with strategies that are doing and making an investment bet. And so here we have a great project in Hungary, which is an ongoing project on sustainable finance strategy and action plan with EBRD. So I would just ask maybe Jacek, if you can comment, what's the EBRD's global role and pursuit in our region with sustainable finance?
Thank you very much, Akos, and thank you so much for inviting us. Just to explain to you, EBRD is a London-based development bank, and we operate in 39 countries. We are European by name, but we actually operate from Mongolia, through Central Asia, Europe to North Africa. And we have committed ourselves as an organization to become a majority green bank by 2025. So there's not a lot of time for us to fulfill that. And we look at it from the treasurer perspective, and we are an issuer of green bonds. We are also on the board of the ICMA Green Bond Principles, trying to shape the market. We invest in green products, and in some of the countries, our investments are majority green, for example, in Poland. We are one of the first investors in green products, like, for example, recently in green bond in Slovakia or sustainability-linked bond in Greece. And the third element, which is the work that we are doing in Hungary right now with Deloitte and together with Akos, is also how can we help our member countries, because we are a development bank, on the policy side. So how can we introduce the greening element, the sustainability to finance and to the economies? And that's what we've been discussing as a bank internally, but also a lot with the European Commission. And you may be aware that sustainability and ESG is one of the top 3 priorities for the European Commission, alongside digitalization and economic recovery. Also, the current crisis, post-COVID-19 pandemic, is really helping in a way of becoming greener and bringing that agenda even forward. And we have been engaged in the work like that in a number of countries, where we first try to set up the strategy for the development. What's the roadmap? How the banks and also corporate sector should find themselves in all this sea of regulation that is happening. And so it also from the slides from Hans-Jürgen, for example, at the EU level, EU taxonomy, which only 5% of you just highlighted as a big issue or topic for you at the moment. And we try exactly this to bring all of what's happening at the EU level and more to the national level, and also apply the margin of appreciation to the state of development of the market. So how can we identify whether there are any legal barriers for development of green? Maybe there are in relation to tax or any administrative barriers. And then what incentives we could actually create that for this market to develop? Because very often local investors are not yet in the developed markets differentiating between green or non-green products. So how are we going to make it more attractive for the issuers? And that's what the work we're doing with Akash at the moment, where we are creating a strategy on the national level. And it's quite interesting to see that we're going to have those three levels of the strategies in a way. One on the EU level, one on the national level, and one on the level of companies, organizations, banks themselves. The work that we're doing in Hungary is quite pioneering, and it's the first project of that type. We are doing similar work right now also in the Baltics, in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and trying to also make it more on the cross-jurisdictional basis. And maybe one thing to add, and I hand over back to you, Akush, is the point on data. And one of the elements of that type of work is also to see how we can get access to ESG data. We just completed a different project with Warsaw Stock Exchange to really help investors to see the data, because the non-financial data, whether we want to or not, is becoming as important as the financial data. So hand it over back to you, Akush.
Thank you, Jacek, for this very elaborate description of how you are actually re-entering the region. If I can say so, some countries you come back with the sustainable finance agenda and help scale it up. About the project that we are doing together, I can say that we have three main elements which I think are kind of the cornerstones of any country's national strategy to be reviewed. Is first to have an assessment report of the legal environment, speaking with market participants, both on the FSI side and corporates, but also looking at the startups, how they are looking at the ecosystem. Because if you look at startups, they have the most difficult thing to show their impact, because once a great idea starts, there should be an impact even in 5 or 10 years that we need for decarbonizing the future. And to get this time period with a proper investment vehicle, it's not always the place yet to be with proper investment products. So this is a big thing to think through in country strategies. And of course, the question is where to invest, where you can find pilot ecosystems, and how much is the gap. This is an important part in Europe for all the projects, because in Central Europe we receive EU funding for different purposes which are already green, and of course no investor wants to pay for something that is happening business as usual. So that's a question. On the next slide, I would like to bring some conclusions on a not yet mature capital market. What are the main obstacles? If we look at the first column, you can see that we have general capital market regulations also in Hungary, which are not yet mature, and these are still having some gaps also in how we do securitization, how we allow different type of corporations and legal entities to issue bonds, what type of bonds they can issue, and whether underlying data is ready at all before we speak about green. On the second column, we speak about the sustainability-related market regulation, where we come down to the EU taxonomy, different new standards and labels that are not yet on the market, and also look at sustainable investments, whether they are happening, and it's happening because we know something is sustainable or not, and the reporting part, which is also not that mature as it could be. Of course, national regulations are the ones that are overriding this in other countries like France, Italy. You have a track record of 20 years of proper reporting. And the last column is about EU funding, really, because this is a big question, how you help with new incentives, the green growth, and how you take away taxes that are prohibiting this type of growth. On the next slide, I brought you some short part of our survey, where we were surveying from last year on. Actually, we started in summer, asking financial institutions and corporations about EU taxonomy, their financial targets, how do they finance their current operations, are they ready for bonds, are they ready for loans, and do they move into the green area. We have three findings here. First is that awareness of green finance is there, but the detailed rules coming from direct regulations of the EU or the market standards is not high, both on financial institutions and corporate level. Second is all the limitations that we know from any type of project, how much the capital costs, how good are the returns, what risks are we budgeting in, and whether we report about it. It's all lacking in a way that certainty that we know how to do that properly. And the last point is the opportunity and the role of the governments, which I think in C is a typical thing to also a bit wait and ask the government to set the rules right. So maybe here, Jacek, I drop back one question to you. As you speak with a lot of financial institutions, what do you think? What would be your recommendations for financial institutions to help raise this market?
I think financial institutions, as we see in our region and looking also from our investment side, are actually the pioneers on the green market and the green bond market in our countries of operation. And I think that's a really good trend. We just see recently more of corporate issuers coming to the market as well. And what I would suggest as one of the recommendations is coming from the survey we did in Poland, so not in Hungary, when we're asking about the reporting and elements of ESG data, for example. And almost more than majority of respondents that we surveyed there said that they are very happy to report on ESG data when this is required by regulation. And I think that's where the mindset is also changing, that it would be good to prepare a bit more for the green bond issuances or other products in terms of the sustainability. And then the other element, which was quite interesting coming out of that, was that it's quite difficult in terms of collecting that data across different departments. Organizations are still siloed in a way in terms of the different departments working on different elements that are relevant to the ESG, and it was quite hard to collect that data for them. So I think it will be good to get ready. And finally, maybe last point is we did a survey, which we do every year for the investors in our region. And that means also investors investing in Mongolia. And for the first time at the end of 2020, we've heard words ESG from them. So that mindset is changing, not only on the international investors like us, who are hungry for green assets and supply is so small, but also for the domestic investors. That shift is happening. So for the market players and issuers to catch that shift and be the first ones, I would really recommend to start preparing not only the strategy like we saw, but maybe going for a step farther.
Thank you, Jacek. I think it's a great work. We can say it's still ongoing until the end of December, and I think we will see many other member states coming up with their agenda for sustainable finance that I think will change the landscape. So with that, I thank you, Jacek, being today our guest, and I give back the word to Irena.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I have to say that this is definitely the kind of bigger picture which you presented, but also I hope that this is the inspiration for some of you being with us here, that actually there is the space for the front runners still. If the kind of the most exciting investments are just around the corner, like you as a banking sector should be part of that kind of revolution. And in order to get prepared, there's more and more support which you can get, more and more standards which you can actually search for in actually introducing new products, new offerings, which just is actually touching upon the big and important trend here. So now I want to switch for one question more, which we have for you, to actually understand where are you coming from in terms of what is your role in actually driving the ESG and sustainable finance agenda yourself. And if you allow us to get to know that better, so please pick one of that. If you are really the one who is driving that in your institution, or you are the part of the force and you are getting ready for that, or maybe you are interested and you would like to be involved, but you are not there yet, or you have so many other duties and responsibilities that you don't plan and you don't want to be involved. So please mark one, and it will be very interesting to see who do we have in a room. And also in the meantime, I will have a last question to each of you to finish up and leave you with some kind of recommendation and inspiration about a piece of advice. And depending on like who is in the audience, the advice might differ. But in the meantime, we also received one question about the maturity of different markets. And Hans-Jürgen, obviously you are a global lead, so you have the best view on different maturity across the markets. Would you share your view on like where we can find the best practices and some of the inspiration on the markets? Which countries are the ones which are leading ones, in your opinion?
Yes. I already mentioned Europe. So within Europe, I would say that the UK, which is not European Union, as you know, but the TRA is doing something in this area as well, and they run already a stress test for that reason. They are, just as an example, in this topic, they are quite advanced, yes, and the stress test doesn't look that different to the expected ECB stress test. On continental Europe or European Union area, I would say that France is definitely doing a lot and quite experienced, and Germany as well. So the mature markets in the Nordics, there is something going on, probably based on their, let me say, general perception on sustainability and nature and things like that. So yes, so I don't want to mention all the countries because, but the outperformers or the countries which are quite advanced from our perspective are, as I said, France, UK, Germany.
Thank you so much. Can we look at the pool? Like, what is the result? Okay, it's actually very encouraging. We have a lot of people interested and getting ready for getting involved. So. And also already actually part of that force. So from that perspective, like we have just last 2 minutes, so really like 30 seconds for each. What would be your advice for that group, knowing that they're like we have an actually hungry crowd for getting involved in that agenda? Who wants to start? Hans-Jürgen, would you go first?
First of all, I'm very happy that the 1% who is not interested and not to be involved is participating in this panel. So maybe your opinion will change. Yes, but Irina, sorry, what have been your last question on us?
Yeah, so what is your advice? So what do you advise to that group?
Yes, my advice would be don't wait too long to get the final description of something or the final requirement list. So start and begin the journey, because this will evolve and change over time, and I think the most important thing is that you start and have a starting point.
Super, thank you. Akosh?
Yes, my advice would be really to have a different approach here, because I think it's not anymore the approach we had a couple of years ago, like green is or sustainability is a kind of luxury or a way to choose, but it's actually a way no one can choose anything else. So I would just say that watch out for the regulation, because it doesn't allow anymore to go backwards, and it's getting on a path that will be more and more expensive if you step later. So that's my kind of new approach.
Okay, Jacek, what is your advice?
For me, I think really jump on this trend, which is not even a trend because it's going to stay with us forever. And I'm a capital market specialist, and 5 years ago, I didn't work on any green bond issuances, and that world has changed. And just a quick life example, we all remember, plastic bags in the shop, and then some people started carrying their bags that were reusable bags earlier on. But we all had to switch to that because the plastic bags were forbidden and we had to pay for them. And at the end of the day, all of us were or are having 10 or 12 or 5 of those bags at home. And I think that's a little bit similar to what's happening with ESG and financial sector, that this is also going to become a norm. So good to get involved sooner than later.
Michael?
I can only underpin what has been said. I think this, and I think we learned this today, this will impact all areas of the bank. This will drive business models of banks and the real economy over the coming years. This is the one mega trend, I think, of the coming decades. So embrace it, be part of it, and change the world for better.
Yeah, and maybe just last word from me, it's like make it also personal and very exciting journey. Actually, when you enter that journey, you actually get so much excited and also so much spread across different topics and different subjects, that it's a very exciting journey also for the personal development perspective. So thank you so much to all of you. I hope that you got some insights, a lot to follow up. There's like such a big topic which is ahead of us. So get in touch if any questions arise over this discussion. And thank you so much for all of you for your time here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.